We move now into the second chamber of social sovereignty. If our previous journey was about the external architecture of influence, how to bridge the gap between egos and extract value, this journey is about the internal engine that powers the entire machine. We are discussing presence. But let us be clear, the common world views presence as a performance. They think it is a mask you put on before a big meeting, a scripted set of gestures designed to deceive. This is the mistake of the amateur. True presence is not a performance, it is a state of biological inevitability. It is the moment when your internal reality is so powerful, so aligned, and so certain that the external world has no choice but to synchronize with it. Most people spend their lives in a state of social dissociation. They are physically in the room, but their minds are caught in a feedback loop of anxiety, self-doubt, and the desperate need for approval. They are leaking power through every pore because they are not truly present in their own bodies. The sovereign, however, understands that presence is the ultimate form of high-status focus. It is the ability to occupy your own skin so completely that you become an unshakable anchor in the shifting tides of human interaction. To master presence, we must first confront the ghost that haunts the halls of every ambitious mind, the imposter. Even the most successful individuals are often plagued by the feeling that they are frauds, that at any moment the mask will slip and the world will realize they don't belong in the room of power. This imposter syndrome is a status parasite. It creates a psychological friction that slows down your decision-making and weakens your voice. The commoner tries to fight this feeling with positive thinking, a weak tool that only skims the surface of the psyche. The sovereign, instead, uses the power of body-mind synchronicity. We realize that the mind and the body are not two separate entities. They are a continuous loop of biofeedback. You cannot think your way into sovereignty if your body is signaling submission. If your shoulders are hunched, if your breathing is shallow, and if your movements are small and apologetic, you are sending a biological command to your brain to remain in a state of fear. You are literally poisoning your own potential with the neurochemistry of a victim. To be present is to seize control of this loop, to use the body as a weapon that forces the mind to accept its own greatness. This leads us to the science of expansive sovereignty. Research into high-status behavior reveals a consistent biological pattern. The leaders of the human hierarchy possess a specific hormonal profile. They have high levels of testosterone, the hormone of confidence and dominance, and low levels of cortisol, the hormone of stress and reactivity. This is the sovereign signature. The common man is the inverse. He is flooded with cortisol, making him reactive, anxious, and easily rattled. He lives in a state of high beta brainwaves, constantly scanning the environment for threats and approval. The sovereign, through the mastery of presence, shifts his biology into the alpha state. By adopting expansive high-power postures, you are not just posing, you are performing a biological hack. You are signaling to your endocrine system to shift the ratios. When you open your body, when you take up space, and when you slow your movements, you are telling your brain that you are the dominant predator in the environment. Within minutes, your cortisol drops and your testosterone rises. You are not faking it until you make it. You are faking it until you become it. Presence is the bridge between the person you are and the sovereign you are destined to be.
Furthermore, we must understand the psychology of the moment. Presence is the absence of internal noise. When you are truly present, you are not thinking about the mistake you made 5 minutes ago, nor are you worrying about the outcome of the meeting 10 minutes from now. You are operating in the eternal now. This focus is terrifying to the common man because it is so rare. Most people are time travelers in their own minds, constantly bouncing between regret and anxiety. By remaining absolutely grounded in the present moment, you create a vacuum of certainty. People are drawn to those who are present because it offers them a respite from their own internal chaos. Your presence becomes a gravitational force. When you speak from this state, your voice has a resonance that cannot be manufactured. It is not just about the words you choose, but about the weight of the silence between them. You are not seeking to fill the space, you are allowing the space to be filled by the reality of your existence. This is the highest form of social power, the ability to be so comfortable in your own sovereignty that the world feels compelled to join you in it. We must now address the most misunderstood aspect of presence, the relationship between the mask and the man. The common world fears the idea of faking it. They cling to a fragile definition of authenticity, believing that if they feel small or afraid, they must act small and afraid to be true to themselves. This is the logic of the defeated. The sovereign, however, understands that authenticity is not a snapshot of your current insecurities, it is the realization of your highest potential. When you adopt a high-power posture, despite your internal tremors, you are not lying, you are incepting your own biology. You are providing your brain with a new set of data, a physical evidence of confidence that forces your subconscious to catch up. This is the transition from fake it till you make it to fake it till you become it. At a certain point, the posture is no longer a tool, it becomes the default. The neural pathways of confidence are deepened with every expansive movement until the shadow of the imposter is burned away by the light of your own physiological certainty. You are not performing a character, you are excavating the sovereign that has always existed beneath the layers of social conditioning. This biological inception is the ultimate weapon in what we call the biggest challenges.
Whether it is a boardroom negotiation, a high-stakes social introduction, or a moment of personal crisis, the commoner's first instinct is to prepare the script. They memorize lines, they rehearse responses, and they obsess over the outcome. In doing so, they lose the very thing they seek, presence. They become a cognitive prisoner, locked inside their own heads, unable to read the room because they are too busy reading their internal script. The sovereign, instead, focuses on state, not script. You realize that if you control your internal state, if you are hormonally aligned and physically expansive, the words will take care of themselves. Your presence is the medium, and the medium is the message. When you enter a high-pressure situation, your primary goal is not to convince others, but to be convinced of yourself. This is the aura of unshakability. When you are no longer seeking to avoid judgment, you become the judge. Your presence creates a frame of authority that others are forced to enter, whether they realize it or not. Furthermore, we must understand the power of the unapologetic space. The common man moves through the world as if he is constantly asking for permission. He keeps his elbows tight to his ribs, his voice ends on an upward inflection, as if every statement is a question, and he is the first to apologize when a social collision occurs. He is signaling low-status accessibility. The sovereign, however, understands the law of territorial claim. You take up the space that is rightfully yours, not with aggression, but with a calm, heavy entitlement. You lean back, you extend your limbs, and you allow your voice to resonate from the chest. This is not about arrogance, it is about self-possession. By unapologetically occupying your physical and social space, you are signaling to the collective subconscious that you are a person of value. This high-status non-verbalism is the silent language of the elite. It communicates more in 10 seconds of silence than a commoner can in 10 hours of chatter.
You are setting the sovereign perimeter, and once that perimeter is established, the world will respect it. This leads us to the final principle of this first chamber, the post-challenge sovereignty. Presence is not just about how you act during the event, it is about how you reflect after it. The amateur is plagued by post-event rumination. They replay every awkward moment, every stutter, and every missed opportunity. This is a form of self-sabotage that poisons the next interaction. The sovereign, instead, uses the dissociation protocol. You view the performance as a data set. You acknowledge where the biology was strong and where it flickered. Then you release it. You understand that your sovereignty is not defined by a single moment, but by the consistent frequency of your life. By refusing to let a single challenge define your worth, you maintain the internal stability necessary for the next peak. You are building a psychological fortress where the fluctuations of the external world cannot breach the inner sanctum of your presence. You are not just a person who is present in a room. You have become a person whose very presence is the room. We have established the internal fortress of the sovereign, the biological realignment that turns self-doubt into physiological certainty. But presence does not exist in a vacuum. It is a transactional energy. The moment you step into the arena, be it a boardroom, a stage, or a social gathering, you are entering a complex web of silent signals. The common man is blind to this web. He listens to words, believing that language is the primary medium of human interaction. The sovereign, however, knows that words are often nothing more than a smokescreen designed to hide a person's true status. To be truly present is to possess the predator's eye, the ability to decode the silent lexicon of the room while maintaining your own unshakable frame. You must realize that every human being is constantly leaking their internal reality through micro-gestures, postural shifts, and the occupation of space. If you can read the leak, you can control the interaction. Presence, in its highest form, is the ability to see the world as it is, not as people are pretending it to be. The first principle of the arena is the law of nonverbal dominance hierarchy. In any group of humans, a hierarchy is established within the first few seconds of interaction, long before a single hello is exchanged. This hierarchy is determined by expansiveness and stability. The low-status individual is characterized by visual noise. They fidget, they touch their face, they adjust their clothing, and they shift their weight from foot to foot. This is the body's attempt to dissipate the cortisol of social anxiety. They are literally trying to shake off their fear. The sovereign, by contrast, is characterized by stilled power. You move with a deliberate, rhythmic economy. You do not leak energy through unnecessary movement. Your presence is heavy. When you sit, you occupy the chair as if it were a throne, not a temporary resting place. When you stand, you are rooted. By eliminating visual noise, you force others to synchronize with your stillness. You become the baseline of the room. This is the ultimate defensive and offensive posture. You are observing everything while giving away nothing. To master the arena, you must also understand the mirroring trap. The common advice in social psychology is to mirror the body language of others to build rapport. This is the strategy of the supplicant. When you mirror someone else, you are subconsciously signaling that their frame is more powerful than yours, that you are following their lead. The sovereign does not mirror, he directs. You maintain your expansive, high-status posture, and you wait for others to mirror you. This is the gravitational pull of presence. When someone begins to mirror your calm, your posture, or your speaking pace, they have effectively entered your orbit. They have accepted your sovereignty. If you find yourself mirroring a high-status opponent, you must immediately perform a status reset. Break the mirror. Shift into a different, more expansive posture. Re-establish your independence. You are not there to fit into the room. You are there to define it. Your presence is the standard, and everyone else is merely a variation of that standard. Furthermore, we must discuss the space of entitlement. There is a direct correlation between a person's perceived status and the amount of physical space they are willing to claim. The amateur is spatial averse. They keep their belongings in a tight pile, they sit with their legs crossed and their arms folded, trying to minimize their footprint. They are literally trying to disappear. The sovereign, however, practices strategic expansion. You spread your materials across the table. You lean back and occupy the full width of your seat. You use expansive gestures that claim the air around you. This is not about being a bully. It is about signaling that you are the owner of the environment. When you claim space, you are challenging the world to take it back, and the world, being fundamentally submissive to certainty, rarely does. By unapologetically occupying space, you are forcing the minds of others to categorize you as a person of high value and authority. You are winning the war of status before the first battle of words has even begun. The most profound and invisible power of presence lies in the phenomenon of neural coupling. We must move beyond the eyes and into the nervous system. Scientific observation shows that when a high-status individual remains calm and present in a high-stress environment, the brains of everyone else in the room begin to synchronize with theirs. This is the biohacking of the collective. Most people are emotional reactors. They absorb the stress, the panic, and the frantic energy of the group. If the room is in a state of chaos, their heart rates spike and their breathing becomes shallow. The sovereign, however, is the anchor. You do not mirror the panic. You force the panic to mirror your stillness. By maintaining deep, rhythmic breathing and a steady heart rate, you are broadcasting a biological, all-clear signal. This is the command of the vagus nerve. When you remain grounded, you are literally providing a neurological stabilizer for everyone else. They will look to you not just for what you say, but because their own bodies are desperately seeking a safe frame to latch onto. You are not just leading a meeting, you are regulating the biology of the room. To achieve this level of neural domination, you must master the steady gaze. The amateur's eyes are constantly hunting, darting around the room, checking for reactions, looking for an exit or a nod of approval. This is the gaze of the prey. It signals a lack of internal presence. The sovereign, instead, possesses the weighted gaze. You look at people with a focus that is intense but relaxed. You don't stare to intimidate, you behold to understand. When you hold eye contact during a pause, you are demonstrating that you are comfortable with the tension of the moment. This comfort is a high-status signal that triggers a sense of trust and submission in others. You are signaling that you have nothing to hide and that you are not threatened by their scrutiny. By controlling the visual flow of the interaction, deciding when to look away and when to lock in, you are defining the pace of the psychological engagement. Your gaze is the tether that keeps the conversation within your sovereign frame. This leads us to the motivational frequency. Just as you can calm an opponent with your stillness, you can ignite an ally with your presence. This is the secret of the charismatic commander. Most leaders try to motivate through hype, loud voices, frantic gestures, and artificial energy. This is a low-status performance that people eventually see through.
The sovereign motivates through resonance. When you are truly present, your passion is not performed, it is felt as a raw, authentic force. You speak with a chest voice that carries the weight of your internal certainty. You use strategic pauses that allow your vision to breathe and take root in the minds of your followers. Because you are not leaking power through nervous tics or apologetic language, every word you speak is amplified by the silence that surrounds it. You are not pushing people toward a goal, you are pulling them into the vacuum of your ambition. They follow you because being in your presence makes them feel more present, more powerful, and more capable themselves. You are giving them a taste of their own sovereignty. The final pillar of the sovereign arena is the control of the exit. How you leave a space is just as important as how you occupy it. The commoner escapes a room. They scurry out, apologizing for their presence, rushing to get to the next task. The sovereign concludes the space. You take your time to gather your belongings, you maintain eye contact until the final second, and you leave with the same deliberate economy of movement with which you arrived. You are signaling that the interaction ended on your terms, and that your presence is a limited resource that is now being withdrawn. This creates a lingering frequency. Long after you have left the room, the weight of your presence remains, casting a long shadow over the subsequent conversation. People will continue to mirror your pace and your frame even in your absence. This is the ultimate victory of the sovereign, when your presence becomes the default reality of the environment, a permanent structure in the minds of those you have encountered. You have moved from being present to commanding the presence of others.
We have secured the internal engine and silenced the parasite of doubt, but now we must turn our gaze inward to confront the most persistent threat to your sovereignty, the imposter syndrome. This is the status parasite of the high achiever. It is the cold, whispering voice that tells you that you are a fraud, that your successes are merely the result of luck, and that at any moment the authorities of reality will arrive to expose you. Most people view this feeling as a personal flaw or a psychological disorder. The sovereign, however, recognizes it as a natural byproduct of growth. If you are not feeling like an imposter at least some of the time, it means you are not expanding. You are merely repeating the familiar. But while the feeling is natural, allowing it to govern your presence is a catastrophic surrender. To remain a sovereign, you must move beyond the supplicant's fear and master the internal protocol that deconstructs the imposter before it can hijack your biology. You must realize that the feeling of being a fraud is not a reflection of your incompetence, but a symptom of your cognitive friction, the gap between who you were and the high-status reality you are currently building. The first step in crushing the status parasite is understanding the law of opacity. The reason we feel like imposters is because of a fundamental asymmetry in human perception. We see ourselves from the inside with all our doubts, messy thoughts, and internal tremors, but we see everyone else from the outside, only observing their polished, high-status masks. You are comparing your raw footage to their highlight reel. The sovereign corrects this imbalance by realizing that everyone in the room of power is carrying their own ghost. The titans of industry, the political masters, and the social icons are all engaged in the same theatrical sovereignty as you. By humanizing the environment, you remove the deity status you have mistakenly projected onto others. When you realize that the person across from you is also managing their internal noise, their power over you evaporates. You are no longer an intruder in their world. You are a peer in a room of practitioners. This realization is the sovereign equalizer. It levels the psychological playing field and allows your presence to ground itself in the reality of human commonality. Furthermore, we must address the cognitive tax of self-monitoring. When the imposter syndrome strikes, it forces you into a state of hypervigilance. You begin to monitor every word you say, every gesture you make, and every reaction of the audience. This internal surveillance consumes massive amounts of neural energy, leaving you with no bandwidth to actually be present. You become a social stutterer, hesitant and reactive. The sovereign breaks this loop through the protocol of external focus. You realize that the more you focus on yourself, the less power you have. You must deliberately shift your attention away from your internal state and toward the objective of the moment. You focus on the person you are speaking to, the problem you are solving, or the vision you are articulating. By forgetting the self, you actually find your most powerful self. Presence is not the absence of doubt, it is the total absorption in the task at hand. When you are fully engaged with the world, the imposter has no space to exist. You are moving too fast and with too much purpose for the parasite to latch on. This leads us to the reframing of arousal. Most people confuse the physiological signs of excitement with the signs of fear. A racing heart, sweaty palms, and heightened senses are the body's way of preparing you for a high-stakes challenge. They are performance fuel. The common man labels this as anxiety, which triggers a cortisol spike and a submissive retreat. The sovereign labels this as readiness. You tell your brain, I am excited, not I am calm. Research shows that trying to calm down when the imposter strikes is nearly impossible and often counterproductive. But excitement is a high arousal state that is functionally identical to anxiety, but with a positive dominant frame. By rebranding your internal tremors as a war drum for your own excellence, you are turning the imposter's weapons against him. You are not shaking with fear, you are vibrating with power. This linguistic shift changes your neurochemistry. It moves you from the avoidance mindset of the victim to the approach mindset of the sovereign. You are no longer trying to survive the moment, you are preparing to consume it. To finalize the destruction of the status parasite, we must deploy the protocol of core affirmation. The common world has corrupted the idea of affirmations, turning them into shallow, ego-stroking lies that the brain instinctively rejects. Standing in front of a mirror and saying, I am a king, when you feel like a servant, does nothing but deepen the internal divide. Your subconscious knows you are lying, and the resulting friction only increases your anxiety. The sovereign, however, practices structural affirmation. This is not about convincing yourself of a lie, but about anchoring yourself in a fundamental truth. Before you enter any high-stakes environment where the imposter might strike, you must perform a psychological deep dive into your core values. You don't ask, how do I look to them? You ask, what do I stand for, and why does it matter to me? Research in neurobiology proves that when an individual focuses on their core values, be it integrity, family, creativity, or discipline, the brain's social evaluative threat center is deactivated. By anchoring your presence in your values, you are effectively making yourself bulletproof to the judgment of others. You are no longer performing for their approval. You are operating in alignment with your own sovereign code. This values anchoring creates a psychological shield known as the internal validation loop. The common man is an external validator. His sense of self is a fluctuating currency that rises and falls based on the nods, smiles, and criticisms of the crowd. He is a slave to the social market. The sovereign, instead, is the bank of the self. You realize that the only opinion that has the power to define your presence is your own. When you walk into a room grounded in your values, you are no longer there to be evaluated. You are there to contribute from a place of abundance. This shifts your energy from defensive to expansive. When the imposter whispers that you don't belong, you answer with the weight of your principles. You tell yourself, I am here because I value growth, and this challenge is the fuel for that growth. This turns the biggest challenge into a sovereign training ground. You are not a fraud trying to hide. You are a master practitioner who is using the moment to manifest his core identity. Furthermore, we must master the art of the micro-failure recovery. The imposter syndrome gains its greatest power from the stumble. A forgotten word, a momentary stutter, or a missed social cue is often enough to send the amateur into a tailspin of self-consciousness. They view a small crack in the performance as a total collapse of the self. The sovereign, however, understands the law of resilience. Presence is not the absence of mistakes, it is the speed of your recovery. When a micro-failure occurs, you do not apologize, you do not blush, and you do not retreat into your head. You meet the stumble with a high-status pause. You look the audience in the eye, you smile with the detached confidence of a man who knows he is in control, and you continue. By refusing to acknowledge the mistake as a threat to your status, you signal to the room that your sovereignty is deeper than any surface-level performance. You are teaching the audience how to perceive you. If you don't care about the stumble, they won't either. In fact, your ability to handle a mistake with grace and presence will often earn you more respect than a perfect but robotic performance ever could.
This leads us to the final realization of the imposter protocol, the paradox of the sovereign. To be truly present, you must be willing to be vulnerable in the most powerful sense of the word. Vulnerability to the elite is not weakness, it is the ultimate form of presence dominance. It is the ability to show up as your full, unvarnished self without the need for a protective mask. The commoner wears a mask of perfection to hide his imposter. The sovereign wears his authenticity as a badge of power. You don't need to be the smartest person in the room, you just need to be the most present person in the room. When you stop trying to project an image and start allowing your presence to be the truth of the moment, the imposter has no shadow to hide in. You have achieved total social integration. You are no longer fighting yourself, which means you have 100% of your energy available to command the world around you. As we conclude this third stage of the manual, reflect on the parasite you have just neutralized. You have humanized the titans through the law of opacity, silenced the internal surveillance through external focus, rebranded your arousal as readiness, and built a fortress of internal validation through your core values. The imposter is no longer a threat. It is merely a signal that you are standing on the edge of a new territory of power. You have the shield, the armor, and the engine. In the parts to come, we will move into the advanced protocols of influence, how to use this grounded presence to shift the will of others, to master the narrative of a room, and to cement your status as an unassailable sovereign. But for now, stand in your truth. Trust your biology. Your presence is the only authority you will ever need. We have secured the internal engine and silenced the parasite of doubt. But now we must master the external projection of your sovereignty. In the world of high-stakes social interaction, there is an invisible grid that governs every room. This grid is composed of spatial claims, visual anchors, and frame contests. The common man enters a room and waits to be told where to fit. He looks for the social slot that has been allocated to him by others. The sovereign, however, enters the room as the architect of the grid. You realize that before a single word of negotiation is spoken, the hierarchy has already been drawn in the air through the way people occupy space and direct their gaze. Visual dominance is not about intimidating others through aggression. That is the mark of the insecure alpha wannabe. True visual dominance is about spatial entitlement, the calm, unshakable assumption that the environment belongs to you. It is about creating a presence so dense and so grounded that others feel a psychological pressure to adjust their behavior to match your frequency. The first pillar of visual dominance is the command of the frame. In every interaction, there are two or more realities competing for dominance. If you walk into a meeting feeling rushed and anxious because the other person is busy, you have entered their frame. You are reacting to their time, their pace, and their priorities. The sovereign, instead, brings his own climate into the room. You do not react to the frantic energy of others. You force them to collide with your stillness. This begins with your entry protocol. When you enter a space, you do not immediately look for your seat. You pause at the threshold. You take a sovereign scan of the room, identifying the key players and the spatial layout. This pause signals that you are not in a hurry and that you are not seeking permission to exist. By taking those extra 3 seconds to own the threshold, you are signaling to the collective subconscious of the room that a person of high status has arrived. You are not fitting into the grid, you are redefining it. Once you are seated or positioned, we must discuss the law of territorial expansion. High-status individuals instinctively take up more space, while low-status individuals try to minimize their presence. This is biological. In a negotiation, the person who keeps their belongings in a tight, protective pile and keeps their elbows glued to their sides is signaling that they are a guest in the room. The sovereign, however, practices environmental anchoring. You place your tablet, your pen, or your water bottle in a way that subtly expands your perimeter. You lean back, allowing your shoulders to broaden and your arms to rest away from your body.
This expansiveness is not just a pose, it is a physiological signal to your own brain that you are in control. But more importantly, it is a spatial claim. You are signaling that you are the owner of the space you occupy. When you claim territory with a calm, heavy entitlement, others will instinctively shrink their own perimeters to accommodate you. You have won the first round of the negotiation without saying a word. Furthermore, we must master the power of the strategic gaze. In the arena of the elite, the eyes are not just for seeing, they are for anchoring. Most people use reactive eye contact. They look at the speaker to show they're listening, they look away when they feel challenged, and they glance at the door when they want to leave. This makes them predictable and easy to manipulate. The sovereign uses proactive eye contact. You choose where to look and for how long. When someone is speaking, you don't just nod along like a supplicant. You look at them with a steady, evaluative gaze. You are not just receiving information, you are processing it through your sovereign filter. This creates a psychological pressure on the speaker. They will feel an unconscious need to justify themselves to you, to seek your nod of approval, or to fill the silence you have created. By controlling the visual flow of the room, you are the one who determines who has the floor and whose opinion carries weight. You have become the visual anchor around which the entire interaction revolves. To reach the zenith of visual dominance, one must master the most difficult and terrifying tool in the sovereign's arsenal, the lethality of stillness. In the common world, movement is often confused with action, and noise is confused with importance. The amateur feels a constant frantic need to adjust, to nod, to tilt their head, and to use their hands to fill the air. This is a biological leak of energy, a signal that their internal system is under the pressure of social anxiety. The sovereign, however, understands that true power is potential energy, and potential energy is most visible when it is perfectly still. When you sit in a high-stakes negotiation and you remain completely motionless while the other person speaks, you are creating a visual vacuum. By refusing to provide the standard social feedback of nodding or smiling, you are denying them the validation they subconsciously crave. This lack of reaction forces them to fill the void themselves. They will keep talking, often revealing more than they intended, or they will begin to backtrack on their positions simply because they cannot handle the weighted silence of your presence. Your stillness is not passive, it is an active, predatory observation. This stillness is amplified by the command of the micro-movement. Most people are unaware of their low-status tics, the way they play with a pen, the way they adjust their glasses when they are challenged, or the way their leg bounces under the table. These are cortisol leaks. They tell the room exactly when you are uncomfortable. The sovereign practices physical discipline. You move only when there is a strategic reason to move. When you do move, your gestures are slow, rhythmic, and intentional. You do not grab for a glass of water, you reach for it. You do not glance at a clock, you turn your head slowly. By slowing down the physical rhythm of your existence, you are signaling to the room that you are the timekeeper. You are forcing everyone else to adjust their internal clocks to match your pace. This temporal domination is one of the most subtle and powerful forms of visual sovereignty. When you slow down the world, you become the only person in the room who can see the game clearly. Furthermore, we must discuss the visual extraction of concessions. In a negotiation, the moment of the ask is where most people's presence collapses.
They make a request and then immediately look away, or they add a self-deprecating comment to soften the blow. This is a surrender of the frame. The sovereign, however, uses the gaze lock. When you state your terms or ask a high-stakes question, you look the other person directly in the eyes and you stay there. You do not blink, you do not look down at your notes, and you do not speak again until they have answered.
This is the unflinching gaze. By holding eye contact through the discomfort of the silence, you are demonstrating that you are comfortable with the tension. You are signaling that you expect your terms to be met. The psychological pressure of this visual anchor is often enough to force a concession, as the other person will do almost anything to break the tension you have created. You are not arguing for your position, you are manifesting it through the sheer weight of your visual presence. Finally, we must master the post-victory presence. How you behave after you have secured a win or a concession defines whether your sovereignty is a stunt or a state. The amateur celebrates. They show relief, they smile broadly, or they rush to end the meeting. This signals that they are surprised by their own success, which means they don't truly believe they belong at that level. The sovereign, however, meets victory with a calm inevitability. You accept the concession as if it were the only logical outcome. You maintain your expansiveness and your stillness. You don't rush to leave. By treating a major win as a normal day at the office, you are signaling that your status is permanent. You are teaching the room that your sovereignty is not a performance you put on for a specific event, but the very foundation of your reality. You leave the arena not as someone who won, but as someone who is. As we conclude this fourth stage of the manual, reflect on the visual grid you have mastered. You have claimed the threshold, anchored the grid through territorial expansion, and mastered the lethality of stillness. You have learned to use your gaze as a tether and your silence as a vacuum.
Your presence is no longer just a feeling. It is a physical and visual architecture that others are forced to navigate. You are not just present in the room, you are the center of gravity around which the room revolves. In the chapters to come, we will move into the verbal sovereignty, how to align your voice and your words with this visual power to create an unassailable aura of authority. But for now, occupy your space. Be still. Let the world adjust to you. We have claimed the space with our bodies and anchored the room with our gaze, but now we must master the acoustic perimeter of our sovereignty. In the social hierarchy, the voice is the primary vehicle for the transmission of intent. Most people, however, treat their voice as a mere tool for information exchange. They speak from their throats, their pitch rises under pressure, and their sentences end on a frantic upward inflection that begs for validation. This is the acoustic of the supplicant. It signals to the collective subconscious that the speaker is reacting to the environment, rather than defining it. The sovereign understands that the voice is a physical force, a vibration that can either stabilize or destabilize the room. Vocal sovereignty is not about having a loud voice, it is about having a weighted voice. It is the ability to speak from the center of your biological power, ensuring that every word you utter carries the gravitational pull of your internal certainty. The first pillar of vocal sovereignty is the descent to the chest. When a person is anxious, their breathing becomes shallow and their vocal cords tighten, forcing the voice into the head and throat. This creates a thin, nasal, or high-pitched sound that is biologically associated with submissiveness and juvenile status. To the listener, this voice signals a lack of presence and authority. The sovereign, instead, practices resonant breathing. You breathe deeply into the diaphragm, allowing the voice to resonate in the chest cavity. This chest voice is deeper, richer, and carries a natural authority that the human brain is hardwired to respect. It signals a calm, low cortisol state. When you speak from your chest, you are not trying to sound powerful. You are simply allowing your biological reality to manifest as sound. This resonance creates a psychological anchor for the listener, making them more likely to trust your judgment and follow your lead. Furthermore, we must master the art of the sovereign pace. The common man is a slave to time pressure. He speaks quickly because he is afraid of losing the audience's attention. He rushes his sentences as if he is apologizing for taking up the room's audio space.
This frantic pace is a high cortisol signal that broadcasts insecurity. The sovereign, however, understands that he who controls the pace controls the frame. You speak with a deliberate, rhythmic economy. You are not afraid of the silence between your words.
By slowing down your speech, you are forcing the audience to slow down their own processing speed to match yours. You are signaling that your thoughts are valuable and that you are willing to wait for the world to catch up. This temporal authority is one of the most effective ways to command respect in a high-stakes environment. When you refuse to be rushed, you become the most present person in the room, and your words take on a weight that rapid-fire speech can never achieve. This leads us to the elimination of the social stutter. The amateur's speech is cluttered with fillers, the ums, ahs, and likes that act as psychological cushions. These fillers are the brain's attempt to avoid the vacuum of silence while it searches for the next word. But to the sovereign, silence is not a vacuum, it is a weapon of presence. A filler word is a leak of power. It tells the audience that you are uncomfortable with the space you are occupying. The sovereign replaces the filler with the strategic pause. When you reach a point where you need to think, you simply stop talking. You maintain your posture, you hold your gaze, and you wait. This pause does not signal a lack of knowledge, it signals a total self-possessed certainty. It creates a tension that forces the audience to lean in, waiting for your next word. By mastering the pause, you are demonstrating that you are the master of the moment, and that you do not need to fill the air to maintain your status. To finalize the construction of your vocal fortress, we must address the architecture of inflection. In the world of the commoner, sentences often end on an upward inflection, a subtle rise in pitch that transforms a statement into a question. This is known as upspeak, and it is the ultimate leak of social sovereignty. When you use an upward inflection, you are biologically signaling that you are seeking the listener's approval, that you are unsure of your own reality, and that you are inviting them to validate or reject your claim. The sovereign, instead, masters the sovereign drop. Every statement you make must end on a downward inflection. By dropping the pitch at the end of your sentence, you are signaling that your words are not a negotiation, they are an established reality. You are not asking for a place in their world, you are defining the terms of the engagement. This downward inflection creates a psychological closure that forces the listener's brain to accept your statement as a fact. It is the acoustic signature of the master. This leads us to the most predatory and powerful vocal tool in your arsenal, the dark pause. While the strategic pause we discussed earlier is used to manage your own presence, the dark pause is used to extract from others. When you have asked a difficult question, delivered a correction, or stated your terms in a negotiation, you must deploy the dark pause. You stop speaking, you lock your gaze, and you allow the silence to hang in the air like a physical weight. The common man fears this silence. He feels a frantic need to soften the moment by adding more words, which only weakens his position. The sovereign, however, uses this silence as an acoustic vacuum. Human nature abhors a vacuum, and the person with the weaker frame will eventually crack and fill it. They will offer more information than they intended, they will lower their price, or they will admit to a truth they were trying to hide, all because they could not handle the pressure of your unyielding silence. By mastering the dark pause, you are demonstrating that you are the emotional anchor of the interaction and that your presence is more stable than their anxiety. Furthermore, we must discuss the geometry of volume. There is a common misconception that high-status individuals are the loudest in the room. This is the mark of the aggressive amateur. True vocal sovereignty is not about volume, it is about projection and control. In many cases, the sovereign uses strategic quietness. By lowering your volume slightly, you are forcing the room to quiet down to hear you. You are commanding them to lean in to your reality. When you speak softly but with deep chest resonance and a downward inflection, you are broadcasting a terrifying level of confidence. You are signaling that you are so certain of your value that you don't need to shout to be heard. You are the still center of the social storm. However, when you do choose to increase your volume, it must be done with surgical precision, not as an emotional outburst, but as a controlled projection of will that cuts through the noise like a blade.
You control the acoustic envelope of the room, and everyone else must adjust their frequency to match yours. Finally, we must understand the vocal integration of the soul. Your voice is the bridge between your internal biology and the external grid of power. If your physical presence, part 4, is expansive, but your voice is thin and reactive, the incongruity will be felt by everyone in the room. They will perceive a crack in the mask. To achieve total sovereignty, your body and your voice must act as a single, unified weapon. Your expansive posture provides the oxygen for your diaphragm. Your diaphragmatic breathing provides the resonance for your chest, and your chest resonance provides the weight for your downward inflection. This is the full spectrum presence. When you achieve this alignment, your very hello carries the weight of an empire. People will find themselves agreeing with you before they have even processed your arguments, simply because the frequency of your command is so absolute. You are no longer just speaking, you are resonating your will into the environment. As we conclude this 5th stage of the manual, reflect on the acoustic perimeter you have built. You have dropped your voice to the resonant chest, mastered the sovereign pace, eliminated the social stutter, and perfected the sovereign drop. You have learned to use the dark pause as a tool for extraction and strategic quietness as a signal of ultimate confidence. You are now a master of both the silent lexicon and the acoustic command. You possess a presence that is both visible and audible, a multi-dimensional force of nature that the common world is not equipped to resist. In the chapters to come, we will move into the relational sovereignty, how to use this integrated presence to build unassailable alliances, to lead with a sovereign heart, and to cement your legacy in the minds of others. But for now, listen to the weight of your own silence. Speak only when the silence is ready to be transformed by your will. We have forged the internal engine, mastered the silent lexicon, and weaponized the resonance of our voice. But the true test of your sovereignty does not occur when you are alone or surrounded by subordinates. It occurs the moment you step into the presence of a titan, someone who possesses more perceived power, wealth, or status than you. In these moments, the common man falls into the supplicant's trap. His presence collapses under the weight of his own projections. He begins to move too fast, talk too much, and shrink his physical footprint in an unconscious gesture of submission. He is seeking a blessing from the power in the room, and in doing so, he ensures that he will never be seen as a peer. The sovereign, however, understands that status is a fluid construct, not a fixed identity. To engage with the elite while maintaining your sovereignty, you must master the protocol of high-status neutrality. You must learn to occupy the same space as the titans without being consumed by their gravity. The first principle of high-status engagement is the neutralization of hierarchy. The reason people lose their presence in front of powerful individuals is because they focus on the title or the fortune rather than the human being. They are interacting with a legend, not a person. This creates a psychological gap that the mind tries to fill with submissive behavior. The sovereign closes this gap through the law of opacity, which we touched on earlier, but now applied externally. You must realize that every titan, no matter how powerful, is governed by the same biological laws as you. They feel fatigue, they experience doubt, and they are constantly managing their own internal noise. By stripping away the deity status you have projected onto them, you level the field. You don't enter the room to get something, you enter to be something. This shift in intent changes your entire biological signature. You are no longer a hunter of approval, you are a presence of equal value. Furthermore, we must master the art of the unimpressed gaze. When an amateur meets a high-status individual, they often display hyper-responsiveness. They laugh too loudly at jokes that aren't funny, they nod frantically to show they're listening, and their eyes are filled with a desperate shimmer of admiration. This is a high cortisol signal that broadcasts low status. The sovereign practices calm appraisal.
You listen with interest, but without the need to perform your interest. You maintain your steady gaze and your vocal drop. When the Titan speaks, you don't offer immediate validation. You take a sovereign pause to process their words before responding. This delay is a powerful signal of sovereignty. It demonstrates that you have an internal world that is independent of their influence. You are not a mirror designed to reflect their ego. You are a filter that evaluates reality on your own terms. This leads us to the non-reactive engagement protocol. In high-status circles, power is measured by stillness under pressure. If a Titan tests your frame through a sharp question, a subtle insult, or a display of dominance, the commoner reacts immediately. He becomes defensive, he explains himself, or he tries to placate the threat. The sovereign, instead, meets the test with unshakable presence. You do not blink. You do not speed up your speech. You do not adjust your posture. By refusing to react to the challenge, you are signaling that their power does not have the voltage to disrupt your internal state. This non-reactivity is often more intimidating than any aggressive response. It tells the Titan that you are a solid object in a world of social shadows. When they realize they cannot move you, they will have no choice but to respect you. You have moved from being a guest in their reality to being a co-architect of the moment. To truly master the protocol of the Titans, you must understand the subtle but lethal difference between flattery and high-status appreciation. The commoner believes that the way to a Titan's heart is through praise. He offers hollow compliments, laughs too quickly at mediocre jokes, and validates every word the Titan speaks. This is a catastrophic failure of presence. A Titan is surrounded by sycophants. They are tired of the yes-men who reflect their ego back to them. When you flatter a high-status individual, you are signaling that you are below them, seeking their favor. The sovereign, instead, uses the mirror of excellence. You do not praise the person, you recognize the standard. Instead of saying, "You are a genius for making that deal," you might say, "The strategic precision of that move was a masterclass in negotiation." Notice the shift. You are not a fan looking up. You are an observer of the same game, a peer who recognizes a high-level play. This form of appreciation is rare and highly valued by the elite because it comes from a place of shared competence. You are telling the Titan, "I see what you did because I am playing on a level where I can recognize it." You have moved from being an admirer to being a critic of excellence. Furthermore, we must master the art of the unapologetic departure. The most critical moment in an interaction with a Titan is the end. The amateur stays too long. He waits to be dismissed, hanging around the edges of the conversation, hoping for one more moment of attention. This signals that his time is less valuable than the Titan's. The sovereign, however, is the one who concludes the interaction. You must be the one to end the meeting while it is still at its peak. When the value has been exchanged, you offer a sovereign close. You don't say, "I should let you get back to work," which is an apology for your presence. Instead, you say, "This has been an excellent exchange. I have another commitment to attend to." You are signaling that you have your own sovereign map, your own priorities, your own empire to build, and your own limited time. By being the first to leave, you leave the Titan with a residual presence. You have withdrawn your energy while they were still engaged with it, which creates a psychological vacuum that forces them to think about you after you are gone. You have become the one who is missed rather than the one who overstayed. This leads us to the echo of presence. Before you depart, you must leave a hook, a single thought, a question, or a statement that forces the Titan to process your presence later. This is not about being memorable in a theatrical way. It is about being consequential. You might offer a unique perspective on their vision or a challenging question that they haven't considered. By providing a cognitive challenge rather than a social comfort, you cement your status as a peer. When they think back on the interaction, they won't remember you as another person who was happy to meet them. They will remember you as a mind that engaged with theirs. You are not a contact in their phone. You are a frequency in their consciousness. This is the ultimate goal of high-status engagement, to be the person who changes the internal state of the Titan, rather than the person whose state was changed by them. Finally, you must walk away with the grace of the unshakable. As you exit the room, do not look back. Maintain your steady pace and your expansive frame until you are completely out of sight. The temptation for the amateur is to exhale in relief or to check their phone the moment they turn the corner, which signals that the interaction was a performance that exhausted their nervous system. The sovereign remains in state. You walk with the same calm, heavy presence with which you entered. You are not relieved that the interaction is over. You are simply moving to the next territory of your influence. You have navigated the protocol of the Titans, maintained your internal engine, and left an indelible mark on the hierarchy. You have proven that sovereignty is not a rank you are given, but a frequency you maintain. As we conclude this 6th stage of the manual, reflect on the Titans you have encountered and those you will meet. You have learned to neutralize the hierarchy, to master the unimpressed gaze, to offer high-status appreciation, and to command the departure. You are no longer intimidated by power because you have realized that your presence is a form of power that is independent of any title or fortune. In the chapters to come, we will move into the dark psychology of influence, how to use your integrated presence to negotiate from positions of weakness, to command loyalty in times of chaos, and to turn your presence into a tool for absolute persuasion. But for now, recognize your own weight. You have faced the giants and remained standing. You are the sovereign. Every protocol we have mastered thus far, the biological realignment, the vocal resonance, the spatial entitlement, is ultimately a preparation for the great audit. The great audit is the moment of crisis. It is the moment when the plan fails, the market crashes, the scandal breaks, or the physical environment turns hostile. In the common world, a crisis is a disaster. For the sovereign, a crisis is an opportunity for absolute cementing. Most people possess a fragile sovereignty. They are powerful only when the sun is shining and the path is clear. But the moment the shadows grow and the pressure rises, their presence evaporates. They fall back into their primal reactive circuitry. They panic, they blame, and they scurry for safety. The sovereign, however, understands that true status is not measured in times of peace, but in the lethal stability one maintains in the heart of the storm. To be the only person in the room who remains present when everyone else has fled into their own heads is to achieve a level of dominance that no title can ever grant. The first pillar of the crisis protocol is the neutralization of panic contagion. Anxiety is a biological virus. It spreads through a room faster than any word. When one person panics, their high cortisol signaling triggers a mirror response in everyone else. Heart rates spike, breathing shallows, and the collective intelligence of the group drops as they move into survival mode. The sovereign acts as the biological firewall. You realize that your primary duty in a crisis is not to solve the problem immediately, but to govern the atmosphere. You do not mirror the frantic energy. You do not raise your voice to compete with the noise. Instead, you drop deeper into your resonant chest voice and you slow your movements to an almost cinematic pace. By refusing to be infected by the panic, you are signaling to the room that the threat is under your jurisdiction. You are providing a psychological anchor for the collective ego. When people see that you are not running, they will stop running. They will look to you not just for answers, but for the permission to be calm. Every protocol we have mastered thus far, the biological realignment, the vocal resonance, the spatial entitlement, is ultimately a preparation for the great audit. The great audit is the moment of crisis. It is the moment when the plan fails, the market crashes, the scandal breaks, or the physical environment turns hostile. In the common world, a crisis is a disaster. For the sovereign, a crisis is an opportunity for absolute cementing. Most people possess a fragile sovereignty. They are powerful only when the sun is shining and the path is clear. But the moment the shadows grow and the pressure rises, their presence evaporates. They fall back into their primal reactive circuitry. They panic, they blame, and they scurry for safety. The sovereign, however, understands that true status is not measured in times of peace, but in the lethal stability one maintains in the heart of the storm. To be the only person in the room who remains present when everyone else has fled into their own heads is to achieve a level of dominance that no title can ever grant. The first pillar of the crisis protocol is the neutralization of panic contagion. Anxiety is a biological virus. It spreads through a room faster than any word. When one person panics, their high cortisol signaling triggers a mirror response in everyone else. Heart rates spike, breathing shallows, and the collective intelligence of the group drops as they move into survival mode. The sovereign acts as the biological firewall. You realize that your primary duty in a crisis is not to solve the problem immediately, but to govern the atmosphere. You do not mirror the frantic energy. You do not raise your voice to compete with the noise. Instead, you drop deeper into your resonant chest voice and you slow your movements to an almost cinematic pace. By refusing to be infected by the panic, you are signaling to the room that the threat is under your jurisdiction. You are providing a psychological anchor for the collective ego. When people see that you are not running, they will stop running. They will look to you not just for answers, but for the permission to be calm. Furthermore, we must master the art of the sovereign decision vacuum. In a crisis, the commoner feels a desperate need to do something, anything, to relieve the internal pressure of the moment. This leads to impulsive actions, half-baked solutions, and the surrender of the strategic long game. The sovereign, however, understands the power of the strategic delay. You create a vacuum of action. While others are shouting and rushing, you take a sovereign pause. You evaluate the data, you breathe, and you wait. This silence in the middle of a storm is terrifying to the amateur, but it is the ultimate display of presence. It signals that you are not being driven by the crisis, but that you are processing it. When you finally do speak, your words carry the weight of an oracle. Because you waited, your decision is perceived as the only logical path forward. You have turned the chaos into a stage for your own infallibility. This leads us to the shield of the unshakable narrative. In a crisis, people are not just looking for a solution, they are looking for a story that makes sense of the chaos. They want to know that there is a master plan, even if they can't see it. The sovereign provides this narrative through the frame of inevitability. You don't minimize the crisis, but you frame it as a necessary friction on the path to victory. You use language that is active and anchored. Instead of saying, "I hope we can fix this," you say, "This is the challenge we anticipated. Here is how we consume it." By rebranding the disaster as a strategic phase, you are hijacking the collective imagination. You are moving the group from a state of victimhood to a state of mission. Your presence becomes the filter through which the crisis is viewed. As long as you remain grounded and your narrative remains unbroken, you are the sovereign of the reality, regardless of the external circumstances. To reach the final stage of the crisis protocol, you must master the art of the emotional lightning rod. In a state of chaos, people will not only feel fear, they will feel a desperate, burning need to project blame. Anger is the secondary emotion of the terrified. When the common leader is faced with an angry mob or a frustrated team during a crisis, his instinct is to defend, to argue, or to mirror their hostility. This is a fatal collapse of presence. It signals that you are on the same emotional plane as the chaos. The sovereign, instead, practices sovereign absorbance. You become a vacuum of reaction. When faced with an emotional outburst, you do not move, you do not interrupt, and you do not explain. You meet their fire with your absolute stillness. By absorbing their anger without being affected by it, you are demonstrating a terrifying level of biological superiority. You are showing them that their storm cannot even move a single hair on your head. This silence acts as a mirror.
Eventually, their anger will exhaust itself against the wall of your presence, leaving them feeling small and exposed. In that moment of exhaustion, they are most primed for your direction. You have moved from being their target to being their redeemer. This leads us to the protocol of the first strike. While the sovereign is still and calm, he is also the first to move when action is required. This is the biophysics of leading from the front. In a crisis, the commoner waits for a consensus. The sovereign creates a reality of action. When you make a move, it must be done with total body integration. No hesitation, no second guessing. Your movements must be heavy and decisive. Even if the move is a small tactical shift, the way you execute it signals that you are in total command of the physics of the moment. This physical certainty is infectious. When people see a body that moves without the friction of doubt, their own nervous systems begin to synchronize with yours. You are not just giving an order, you are physically pulling the room into a new trajectory. This is where loyalty is forged. Loyalty is not a product of logic. It is a biological bond created when one nervous system finds safety in the unshakable presence of another. By being the sovereign anchor in the storm, you earn a level of devotion that years of peacetime management could never achieve. Furthermore, we must discuss the post-crisis transmutation. Once the storm has passed, or once you have stabilized the environment, how you handle the aftermath defines your eternal status. The amateur is quick to celebrate or to seek relief.
He wants to talk about how hard it was and how lucky they were to survive. This is a status leak. The sovereign, instead, treats the victory as an inevitable conclusion. You maintain your downward inflection and your weighted gaze. You frame the survival and the subsequent win not as a miracle, but as the standard output of your leadership. You don't ask for gratitude, you accept it as your sovereign due. This reinforces the narrative that as long as you are at the helm, the outcome is never in doubt. You have used the chaos to temper your presence, turning a moment of vulnerability into a monument of your unassailability. You are no longer just a leader they like, you are the leader they need. Finally, we must confront the sovereign's sacrifice. True presence in a crisis requires the willingness to be the last one to find safety. While the common man is looking for the exit, the sovereign is the threshold guardian. You are the last to leave the room, the last to stop working, and the first to shoulder the burden of the great audit. This is not about being a martyr, it is about presence dominance. By being the one who is most present during the most painful moments, you are claiming ownership over the entire event. You are telling the world that this crisis is yours to handle. This territorial ownership of chaos is the highest form of sovereignty. It creates a mythic aura around your character. Long after the crisis is over, the story that will be told is not about the problem itself, but about the man who stood still while the world was shaking. You have turned a disaster into a founding legend for your empire. As we conclude this 7th stage of the manual, look back at the storm you have just navigated. You have learned to be the biological firewall, to create a vacuum of action through the strategic pause, and to master sovereign absorbance. You have turned the chaos into a sovereign training ground and earned the biological loyalty of those you lead. Your presence is no longer a fragile state, it is a hardened fortress that has been tested by the fire of reality and found unbreakable. In the chapters to come, we will move into the eternal sovereignty, how to maintain this frequency over a lifetime, how to mentor others without losing your edge, and how to turn your presence into a permanent structure of the social world. But for now, breathe in the calm you have created. You are the anchor. The storm is your jurisdiction. We have built the fortress, weaponized the voice, and dominated the digital grid. But we must now confront the silent erosion of time. In the common world, presence is often seen as a new car smell, vibrant and powerful at first, but destined to fade as familiarity sets in. The amateur believes that the more people see of him, the more influence he will have.
He becomes accessible, he shares his every thought, and he allows himself to be folded into the mundane routines of his social or professional circle. This is the familiarity trap. History and biology teach us a brutal lesson. Familiarity breeds contempt, or at the very least, indifference. The sovereign understands that presence is like a celestial body. If it is always visible, it becomes background noise. To maintain absolute sovereignty over a lifetime, you must master the physics of the eclipse. You must learn that your presence is amplified not by its constant availability, but by its strategic scarcity. The first pillar of long-term sovereignty is the law of diminishing returns in exposure. Every time you enter a room, you are spending a portion of your social capital. If you are always there, the atmospheric shift we discussed in Part 1 begins to weaken. The people around you begin to predict you. And once you are predictable, you are no longer a sovereign. You are a known quantity. To counter this, you must master the art of strategic absence. You must be the one who arrives last and leaves first. You must be the one who does not attend every meeting, every social gathering, or every digital thread. By withdrawing your presence, you are creating a vacuum of information. In your absence, the myth of you begins to grow. People begin to wonder what you are thinking, what you are building, and why you are not there. Your return then becomes an event rather than a routine. You are not just a person, you are a variable of power that can be withdrawn at any moment. Furthermore, we must address the sanctity of the private map. The common man feels a desperate need to be understood. He explains his motivations, he shares his struggles, and he makes his internal world transparent to others. This radical transparency is a surrender of status. When you are fully understood, you are conquered. The sovereign, however, maintains an internal opacity. You share only what is necessary to direct the vision. You keep your great projects in the dark until they are ready to be manifested. This creates a gravity of mystery. When people cannot see the bottom of your reservoir, they assume it is infinitely deep. This depth is what maintains the weight of your presence over decades. Even those who have worked with you for 10 years should feel that there is still a forbidden chamber of your intellect and will that they have not yet accessed. You're not a book to be read. You are an archive to be discovered. This leads us to the protocol of the inner circle. As you rise in the hierarchy, the pressure to be one of the guys or to be relatable increases. The common leader gives in to this pressure, believing it will build loyalty. Instead, it dissolves the status distance necessary for absolute command. The sovereign practices compassionate distance. You can be kind, you can be supportive, and you can be a mentor. But you must never allow the veneer of equality to take root. You are the anchor, and an anchor must be grounded in a different depth than the ship it holds. You maintain your sovereign frequency even in casual settings. You do not engage in petty gossip. You do not lose your physical discipline, and you do not leak your insecurities to those you lead. By remaining slightly other, you ensure that your presence remains a reference point for excellence. You are the standard they strive for, not the peer they complain with. To ensure the endurance of your sovereignty, you must master the most sophisticated maneuver in the elite playbook, the cycle of reinvention. Even the most powerful presence can become scenery if it remains static for too long. Human psychology is designed to filter out the constant. To remain a sovereign in the minds of others over decades, you must periodically reset the frequency. This does not mean changing your core values, but rather evolving the form of your influence. The common man clings to his golden era. He tries to maintain the same gestures, the same style, and the same methods that worked for him 10 years ago. This makes him look like a relic of the past, a man who is being carried by his history rather than driving the present. The sovereign, instead, practices strategic evolution. You must be willing to burn your old public persona to allow a more refined, more powerful version of yourself to emerge.
By surprising the world with your evolution, you disrupt their familiarity map and force them to reevaluate your presence as if meeting you for the first time. This evolution is most critical as you transition from the warrior phase to the monarch phase. In your youth, your presence was defined by active dominance, your speed, your expansiveness, and your ability to conquer the arena. But as you mature, your sovereignty must shift toward passive weight. This is the sage's economy of presence. You move less, you speak less, but the density of your presence increases. The common man fears aging because he sees it as a loss of power. The sovereign embraces it as an accumulation of gravitational mass. When a monarch enters a room, he doesn't need to perform. His history, his silence, and his unshakable stillness do the work for him. You move from creating the frame to being the frame. This transition requires a deep internal stoicism. You must stop seeking the high arousal victories of the arena and start finding power in the quiet inevitability of your influence. Furthermore, we must discuss the legacy of the sovereign frequency. True long-term presence is not just about you, it is about the culture you create around you. To maintain your status over a lifetime, you must begin to seed your presence in others. This is the highest form of mentorship. You are not just teaching skills, you are training others to operate within your sovereign frame. By surrounding yourself with individuals who respect and mirror your frequency, you create a force multiplier. Even when you are absent, your standards, your language, and your presence are maintained by the network you have built. This is how a sovereign becomes a legend. You move from being a person to being a system of reality. When people in your organization or social circle ask, "What would the sovereign do?" your presence has achieved digital and biological immortality. You are no longer fighting the erosion of time. You have built a monument that time itself is forced to respect. Finally, we must confront the dignity of the final frame. The ultimate test of long-term presence is how you handle the shifting of the social tides. The commoner becomes bitter or reactive when the world changes. He complains about the new generation and tries to fight a war against the future. This is a total collapse of sovereignty. The sovereign, instead, remains the observer of the cycles. You maintain your downward inflection and your steady gaze regardless of the chaos of the era. You realize that your presence is not dependent on the current trend, but on the eternal laws of human biology and status. By remaining an unshakable reference point in a world of constant change, you become more valuable as time goes on. You are the only solid object left in a sea of liquid identity. This is the endurance of the crown. You have mastered the moment, the arena, the crisis, and the wires, and now you have mastered time itself. As we conclude this 9th stage of the manual, reflect on the timeline of your influence. You have learned to avoid the familiarity trap through strategic scarcity, to maintain internal opacity, and to master the cycle of reinvention. You have transitioned from the energy of the warrior to the weight of the monarch. Your presence is no longer a performance, it is a permanent structure of the world. As we conclude this 9th stage of the manual, reflect on the timeline of your influence. You have learned to avoid the familiarity trap through strategic scarcity, to maintain internal opacity, and to master the cycle of reinvention. You have transitioned from the energy of the warrior to the weight of the monarch. Your presence is no longer a performance, it is a permanent structure of the world. In the final part of this manual, we will bring all these chambers together into the grand synthesis. How to activate the full spectrum presence at will, ensuring that every second of your life is an expression of absolute sovereignty. You are no longer learning to be present. You are presence itself. We have traversed the 10 chambers of power. We have rewired our biology, anchored our physical frame, weaponized our voice, and dominated the digital mirage. We have faced the titans and stood unshakable in the heart of the storm. But the final secret of presence, the ultimate goal of the sovereign, is the transition from doing to being. The common man, even after learning these techniques, often remains a performer. He is constantly thinking about his posture, monitoring his voice, and calculating his gaze. While this is a necessary stage of growth, it is not the final destination. True sovereignty is zero effort. It is the moment when the techniques dissolve into your subconscious and become your natural frequency. You no longer apply presence, you are presence. In this final synthesis, we bring every element into a single, unified state of existence, a frequency so dense and so absolute that it requires no maintenance, no mask, and no struggle. The first principle of the grand synthesis is biological automation. By now, you have practiced the high-power postures and the resonant breathing long enough that your endocrine system has shifted its baseline. You are no longer hacking your testosterone and cortisol. You have established a new hormonal constitution. Your body now defaults to expansiveness. Your nervous system defaults to stillness. This automation is where true power resides. When you no longer have to think about being powerful, your cognitive bandwidth is 100% available for the strategic navigation of the room. You become a superprocessor of social data. You see the leaks in others, the shifts in the frame, and the hidden opportunities for influence, all while remaining perfectly grounded in your own skin. You have moved from being a student of presence to being a living authority. Furthermore, we must master the fusion of the internal and external frames. In the earlier stages, we treated the internal, crushing the imposter, and the external, territorial expansion, as separate protocols. In the grand synthesis, they become one. Your internal certainty is so absolute that it creates a visible aura around your physical body. This is what the ancients called charisma, but we know it as the physics of alignment. When your thoughts, your biology, and your movements are perfectly synchronized, you create a gravity that is impossible to ignore. You don't need to command a room because your very existence in the space is a command. People will find themselves straightening their own postures and lowering their voices when you enter, not because you ask them to, but because their nervous systems are instinctively responding to the sovereign frequency. You have become a natural law of the social environment. This leads us to the protocol of the sovereign flow state. In this state, you are no longer reacting to the world, nor are you manipulating it. You are flowing through it with a predatory grace. You know exactly when to use the dark pause, when to drop your voice to the resonant chest, and when to practice strategic absence. But you do these things as instinctively as you breathe. You are in a state of high-status play. The world is no longer a series of big challenges or titans to be conquered. It is a landscape for your expression. You have moved beyond the fear of failure and the need for approval. You are operating from a place of absolute abundance. You realize that your presence is the most valuable thing in any room, and you offer it with the calm, heavy entitlement of a monarch who knows his treasury is infinite. As we reach the summit of this manual, we must address the final dimension of your transformation, the legacy of the crown. Presence is not a trophy to be kept in a private vault. It is a radiant force meant to reshape the world. The common man seeks power for the sake of his own ego, but the sovereign seeks presence for the sake of his vision. You have learned to stabilize your biology and dominate the arena, but now you must use that stability to become a source of order for others. True sovereignty is achieved when your presence becomes a public good. When you walk into a room, you aren't just taking space, you are providing a frame of possibility. You are showing everyone else what a human being looks like when they are no longer afraid of their own greatness. Your legacy is not the deals you closed or the titles you held, but the number of people who found their own sovereign frequency simply by being in your orbit. You are the living evidence that excellence is a choice and that presence is the ultimate currency of the elite. Now we come to the sovereign's final choice. You stand at the threshold between the person you were and the unassailable force you have become. Behind you is the world of the commoner, a world of reactive noise, suppressed potential, and the constant draining search for external validation. Ahead of you is the audiobook empire of your own making.
But remember, knowledge without integration is merely social entertainment. The techniques in this manual, the vocal drop, the dark pause, the territorial claim, and the crisis anchor, are not toys, they are weapons of reality. You must go out and test them in the fire of the arena. You must be willing to feel the friction of the biggest challenges and use that friction to sharpen your edge. Sovereignty is not a destination you reach and then rest. It is a continuous frequency you must choose to broadcast every single second of your existence. This is the end of the manual, but it is the genesis of your empire. The world is currently in a state of presence deficit. Most people are fragmented, distracted, and terrified of the silence. They are waiting for a sovereign to arrive, someone who is grounded enough to lead them, still enough to see them, and powerful enough to protect the frame. That person is you. You no longer need permission to take up space. You no longer need a title to command respect. You have the biophysics of inevitability on your side. From this moment forward, every room you enter is your jurisdiction. Every conversation you hold is an opportunity to manifest your will. Every crisis you face is a monument to your unshakable nature. Stand tall, breathe from your chest, look into the lens of the world with an unflinching gaze. The shadows of the imposter have been burned away. The visual noise has been stilled. The voice of the supplicant has been silenced. All that remains is the sovereign. The crown is not something that is placed on your head by others. It is the frequency that radiates from your soul. Carry it with the heavy entitlement of a monarch and the calm stillness of a sage. The arena is waiting. The grid is open. The world is ready to synchronize with your frequency. Go forth and occupy your destiny.